So I recently uploaded a video about how I dislike the changes to Viktor, and the response was mixed. Understandable, to be honest. That video was very short with a runtime of 4 minutes. It was a rant and I literally made it in like 2 days. But I'd like the chance to elaborate. This isn't me doubling down or anything. I just have more to say than what I said previously, and what I previously said was not very well articulated a lot of the time. I just wanted to get things off my chest or whatever. But here we go, an actual critique. All the problems I can think of and explained as well as I can. This will concern both the Viktor changes made in Arcane as well as his connected rework in League of Legends. So, we can't really go into this thing unless we first go into the subject of Arcane. So you may consider this your spoiler warning. All in all, I think Arcane Season 2 was pretty solid. Season 1 is a clear 10 out of 10, and I'd rank Season 2 a little bit lower than that. Viktor's character is steadily changing in order to build up the whole evolution thing, and throughout episodes 1 through 6, his character doesn't suffer from the pacing as far as I am concerned. Episode 7 was really great, but I couldn't help but notice that we now only had 2 episodes left. Around 90 minutes to wrap up several plot points. And this is where the story started to go somewhat downhill in my eyes. They ran out of time. The show ended alright, but some plot points were just sort of left hanging, such as the conflict between Zahn and Piltover that just sort of worked itself out. Seems kinda quick if you ask me. Or how the Black Rose plotline didn't really lead somewhere. And then of course how Viktor was handled. I wanna make this very clear. I liked a lot how Viktor was handled in Arcane up until the last 2 episodes. He was great in Season 1 and I was very much on board for most of Season 2, up until episode 8 and 9. And most importantly, up until that point, his entire Arcane presence could still very much work with his old lore. Let's rewind to that lore a little bit. Original Viktor was a weak and frail man, much like he was in Arcane. He was a brilliant researcher who became obsessed with the idea that almost every fault in the machinery of Zahn was present due to human error and not because of the engineering itself. This idea became more and more of an obsession as he found his peers more and more difficult to work with. Eventually, Viktor becomes a kind of extremist to the point where he considers machinery to be superior to humanity. That's when he starts to augment his own flesh and blood in order to leave behind the frailty of his weak body. He also decides to offer the same upgrades to other people, should they wish to accept it. Now, whether or not you prefer this lore over the new Arcane story is totally subjective. I personally, of course, prefer the old one, otherwise I wouldn't be here. And I will give you my reasoning as to why that is. But I have seen people say that a good story just couldn't have been told with this old lore, and that Arcane is a clear improvement that had to be done. And that to me is just crazy. Tell me something, how much better was Jinx's lore before Arcane? Do you think they elaborated on her mental health problems back when Get Jinxed was released? Of course not. Every single old League of Legends character had scuffed lore back then, but Arcane took several of them and made an amazing story with it anyways. Even Arcane Season 1 changed a few things, but the general themes of every single character still remained the same, even with those changes. It wasn't until Season 2 where they started to fundamentally change parts of some characters to the extent where it would no longer fit seamlessly into the League of Legends lore. Change for the sake of telling a good story is something that I can get behind 100%. In the old lore, for example, Jace and Viktor were not friends. They were just co-workers who actually fought a lot due to their different personalities. This is somewhat true in Arcane as well, at times, but in Arcane they definitely and undisputedly care for each other. This change, however, is really great for the story, and it doesn't really change any of the important aspects of the champions the way a complete visual redesign does. So why do I prefer the old design, and why do I have a problem with the new design? Well, for one, the thing I enjoy the most about old Viktor is that he was self-made. He wasn't born wealthy, and he wasn't born with power. In Arcane, he was even crippled, though I'm not sure if that was an old lore thing as well. My point is that the guy who grew up in Zahn had a really rough time. The only thing he had was his brilliance, which allowed him to get a spot to study with Piltover's greatest minds. Now, most of this is true for Arcane as well, but the following part is very different at times. When Viktor was old enough, he also became smart and could actually fix some of his own problems. He didn't need to be born with magic to be as powerful as a mage. He could invent his own magic. He didn't need to be born athletic in order to be strong. He could just upgrade his body directly. He could create an armor filled with gadgets that would allow him to become as strong as any mage. And that to me is a brilliant idea for a story. In Arcane, however, Viktor just sort of gains magic. He does invent the hex core himself, but it's clear that he has little control over it, and that he doesn't exactly understand it fully. And after he merges with the hex core at the start of Season 2, things just sort of start happening to him power-wise. He can bless people and drain them of their shimmer corruption, and he is capable of a bunch of strange magical prophet things. And I am fine with him having this type of inherent magic, especially since it comes from a source created by him. But the fact that he no longer just builds things is a clear disconnect from what he used to be. When Jace blew Viktor to bits in episode 6, I expected the following episodes to have Viktor retaliate and upgrade himself with an armor and with weaponry in order to strike back. It would have made all the sense for him to get to work and to build something at the time. Singed was present at the scene of his defeat, and he had access to Warwick's corpse containing the most powerful regenerative abilities known to anyone. It makes perfect sense for Singed to be able to keep Viktor alive so that Viktor himself could upgrade his frail body, very much like how it was done in his original lore. It would also have been a very fitting time to lean into the whole reject the flesh aspect, since his weak body after all was what allowed Jace to easily one-shot him. These are some very minimal plot changes that would completely justify him having an armored design more aligned with his original one. But instead, Viktor just enters a cocoon and is naturally altered by the arcane itself, not by himself. This was strictly and 100% a writer's choice. They didn't have to make it end up that way. They could have just as easily gone for the traditional route. But this is where they directly made a choice to stray away from the machinery and lean fully into the magical aspect of it. And again, the rest of the show could have remained the exact same, except for a more classic design for Viktor. The changes really wasn't required for the story, it was simply made as a stylistic choice. So now you know why I prefer the characteristics of the old Viktor. Let's now talk about why I also prefer the style of him, or rather why I do not prefer the new style. All of this is very much my personal opinion and strictly subjective, but I have reasons. The new style in my mind is just generic. He is a mage with a cloak and a staff. They do some creative things with a split face and with a halo, but the halo could have just as easily been done with a more armored version of Viktor, and the mask to me is just strange. Like, what is even the reason for this version to have a mask? Just randomly growing out of his face? That to me is just very odd. And not the good kind of odd like it seems they were going for. Why does he have a mask if it isn't to hide his face? That's like literally the only reason to have a mask in the first place. To me, it seems like they just traded logic for a cool visual that would showcase him leaving his humanity behind. But for this Viktor, it wasn't even a conscious choice to leave his mortal form, so the whole thing just seems unearned. Original Viktor decides to wear a mask because he doesn't want to show his humanity. But that logic doesn't really work for this new version, because, well, he didn't choose to do so himself. It's just random. The Hex Claw is just kind of there because Viktor is known for having a third arm on his back, but there really is no need for it in this version. He uses his magic through it, but that could have just as easily been done through his staff or his normal two hands. Again, it appears to me as if they traded convenience for a cool visual. Original Viktor specifically built a third arm in order to do extra specialized labor and to get more work done. Once again, it doesn't translate to the arcane version of the character. He just sort of has it for some reason. The new Viktor is of course very skinny, which just seems like a needless change for the sake of change. And again, it just makes him more generic as a typical wizard. But when he emerged from that cocoon, he was magically altered by the arcane itself. He could have looked like literally anything, and the relevance of the plot would have remained the same. If they weren't gonna have him build his own armor, then they could have at least have him emerge armored from the arcane cocoon. At least as a way to pay homage to the previous version of the character. The complete redesign is just unnecessary. So in summary, I think the mask is a downgrade, I think his corpse-like body is totally uncalled for, and he seems to have been designed strictly for visual eye candy reasons, without much else being considered. There are some parts that I like for example the arcane runes of the Hexclaw looking like a halo is super cool. That could have also been done if he wore an actual armor, but still. It's cool. The character designs in the arcane astral plane or whatever is also very sweet. All of this could have remained the same, even if Viktor's physical body was more manually augmented. This is a mind palace after all the characters here are basically in spirit form. And with that in mind, the design works wonders while in here. It is the physical world version of the new Viktor that is the real problem for me. So how does this new version even translate to the game then? Well, horribly. First of all, I consider all of his skins as well as his base model to be vastly downgraded. The only thing that was improved upon seems to be his animations, which, yeah, makes sense. But when looking at his skins, they have just straight up removed several VFX aspects from the models, while also completely altering some of the coolest parts. Deathsworn Viktor may be the worst change, since they have removed the most iconic parts, including his mask and the eyeball in the Hexclaw. Skins such as High Noon Viktor and Deathsworn are also especially affected by his new considerably more skinny character model, which in my opinion just looks ridiculous with his skins. My preference on his new skinny stature is of course just an opinion, but it seems to me at least as if they just tried to implement the arcane version of the champ, and if the skins became awkward looking, then so be it. Not that this even makes sense either, because the new game model has some very awkward differences from the arcane version. His hair in-game, for instance, is spiky, while the arcane hair is long and flows straight down. His crown and mask is different, and so are the gold details on his body. The in-game model just hasn't committed to anything, one way or the other. Once again, the visuals of Arcane is placed before even the game itself. They advertised this rework as a VGU, which basically means changing both the champion model as well as its kit. Previous examples have, for example, been Skarner, Volibear and Fiddlesticks. But considering how Viktor's only changed ability is that his ult can now be evolved, so that it grows when it kills something, it seems extremely generous to call this a VGU, instead of an ASU, where only the model is changed. But no. Viktor's kit is pretty much the exact same, which is funny considering that his theme is now dramatically changed. People have been wanting some changes to at least his W for years now, but again, that one hasn't even been touched. The problem with that is that Viktor's current kit just doesn't fulfill the Mage Jesus power fantasy that is on display in Arcane. While playing Viktor, you just won't feel like the character on screen in Arcane, which probably won't be that fun for the people that watched Arcane and now wants to try to pick up Viktor for the first time. I have seen many people suggest that his metal zombie minions could have easily been some sort of new W, but no, nothing. So if new Viktor players won't like his kit, and old Viktor players won't like his model, then who is this update meant for? That is my big question here. Nobody's gonna be 100% happy. Most people are not even gonna be 50% happy. And since Arcane is canon now, and it's sort of too late to change the show, I find it highly unlikely that anything is gonna change in the game either. Of course, I hope that somehow this video will find its way to some person who can change something, but I know that there isn't a chance really. Best we can hope for at this point is minimal changes to the model and the skins, and then maybe if we're really lucky, they'll release a classic Viktor skin down the road. But as for remaking the remake, that is not something I actually believe is gonna happen. The way they are completely dismantling his identity, even in the most petty ways, like changing his title to Herald of the Arcane, or renaming his E and R from Death Ray and Chaos Storm to Hextech Ray and Arcane Storm. No, I sadly believe old Viktor is done for. So I guess it's been real, Viktor. See ya in the next life. But hey, if you've made it this far, then I'd appreciate a like or two on the video, and I'd love to hear any and all opinions in the comments, no matter if you love or hate the new Viktor. Let's talk about it. Subscribe if you wanna listen to my voice again, and bye!
We lost ourselves, lost our dream. In the pursuit of great, we failed to do good. We have to make it right.